Fate the Winx Saga is an exercise in how little you respect your audience. Created to satiate a hungry older fan base who have been griping about the direction that the Winx franchise has been taking for years, Fate is a Netflix adaptation of the beloved children's cartoon The Winx Club. On numerous and egregious counts, Fate has drawn the ire of the internet, of new viewers and old fans. That being said, it has managed to become one of the most successful shows on Netflix worldwide. With pleasant surprises, a pretty adorable cast, and one or two quite solid episodes that bode well for the future, Fate may yet evolve into something that can stand for itself. But even people who genuinely enjoyed the show, and that is perfectly fine to do, can probably agree that as an adaptation, it's pretty poor. This show blatantly misunderstands its source material, and has little regard for its origins and fan base. You get the impression no one involved in production have actually seen the series. But it really didn't have to be this way. Despite discarding some of Winx's most distinctive features, Fate, seemingly accidentally, shares a lot of elements with Winx. So with Season 2 expected soon, I decided to review the show so far to formulate my thoughts and gripe about what could have been done differently. So easily could Fate have been a show faithful to its origins, whilst retaining all of the new concepts, characters, and locations it has introduced, and my goal in this video is to demonstrate that. I want to show you how easy it could have been. To achieve this, I'm going to stay within the scopes of the story, I'm going to stick with the casting decisions they made. Essentially, I'm going to stay within the realm they've created, focusing mainly on the principal characters, and hopefully demonstrate how you could have created a story that harkens to Winx, even within this new setting, had showrunners appreciated the source material a little more. Let's begin with Aisha. The distortion of Aisha's character is one of the more insidious aspects of the show, especially with how she is the only central character of color and how much source material they had to work with. Aisha is, possibly after Bloom, the most developed character in the Winx Club, since there's a lot in Season 2 dedicated to exploring her dynamics with the other girls, and we learn a lot about her background over the course of the series. In Fate, Aisha is no longer a princess. So step 1, we fix it, reinstated. Aisha is, now once again, a princess. She is not a crown princess maybe, but the niece of the king or something. And this is necessary in explaining why she is in military school in a foreign country instead of her own. Real-life princes and princesses do this all the time, so don't worry your grounded selves about it, Netflix. Restoring Aisha's royal origins makes the weird tension that she has with Stella more reasonable. Stella feels the pressure of being a princess, and perhaps she is envious of Aisha's more easygoing nature, how she doesn't feel as much pressure because she is not in line to the throne. Aisha is popular without trying, and is hardworking, which Stella maybe wishes she was. Meanwhile, Aisha is desperate to succeed because she is a member of the monarchy. She is dutiful, and in reality just as encumbered by the responsibility as Stella. Perhaps something is implied that can be explored in later seasons, like the need to guard an important gateway or something. This could replace her awkward teacher's pet storyline, and that weird tension in episode 3 that goes nowhere. There's a lot of silly dialogue that this can replace without changing the story. Instead of taking care of Bloom because her character essentially exists to support Bloom's in a plot sense, Aisha now does so because she feels it is her duty as a princess of the Otherworld to welcome the First Worlder to their dimension. Perhaps Aisha knows more than she is showing. The secrets of Astadel, Blood Witches, and the Dragon Flame seem to be knowledge kept to a few in the Fate universe, and as a member of the monarchy, Aisha is also privy to this information. Perhaps her realm has their hands bloody in all of this too. None of this has to change the plot for now, but is exciting for the future. In the Winx Club, from the moment we meet Aisha, she is rebelling against the expectations of royal life. She is tortured by her rigid upbringing and resents her parents for her awaiting arranged marriage. For Fate, or at least the first season, I would tone this down. For now, Aisha is still trying to live up to the expectations put on her. She remains devoted and takes her duties seriously. Her rebellion, instead, is something that we should be able to watch build up, and already in Season 1 we can see the origins of it. Instead of being the teacher's pet, Aisha is rigidly rule-abiding and respects authority because that is essentially what she was brought up to represent. We can see this throughout the show as she tries to rein in Bloom, and whenever she is the first to go to the adults when it comes to the misbehavior of the others. The moment where all of the girls, including Stella, choose to side with Bloom, and Aisha instead goes to report their misdeeds, could be the beginning of where she starts to question herself and her need for law and order. Is duty more precious than her friends? Aisha has to decide that for herself, and perhaps the first sparks of rebellion are kindled. Weirdly enough, I'm one of the few people who didn't hate this new version of Stella. My issue is that a lot of her lines, especially one-liners, feel like they were written by a 13-year-old in a bad fanfic. Stella is one of the most beloved characters of the Winx Club, and that's probably why most people have forgotten what a fundamentally flawed person she could be. Stella in the original show wasn't averse to mistreating her friends. She was also the one they were most likely to have tension with. So the way I see it, Stella's characterization in Fate isn't that far off from what could have been. Stella is insecure, selfish, and even cruel at times. But she's also fun, loyal, and loves her friends. I think that's probably why people who grew up with other favorites tend to switch to Stella as an adult. She's relatable in a wishful way. We wish we could be as immature and uncensored as her, and get away with it. And Fate Stella essentially starts off the show as a minor villain to be later integrated into the group. So I think it's okay that we haven't really gotten to see her brighter side yet. I think fixing Fate Stella is mostly about framing. This is what they tried to do in the show. They tried to make it seem as though all of Stella's toxic traits, all her apparent cruelty and lack of consideration, were all just perceived. They could be explained away, she had her reasons, she was suffering too, it was the manipulations of her mother all along, etc. But it was rather clumsy, perhaps for lack of time. A lot of the story relies on Stella's soft villainy, and that's difficult to fix. But rather than change the story, we can change our perception of Stella through her mother. Without altering the story, we can alter how she comes across through Luna. Let's talk about Luna. I have a lot of issues with this character. She's a female figure of authority, and like all the female authority figures in this show, she is abusive and incompetent. I won't get into why this disturbs me. I want to operate within the plot, and there's a really obvious way to take this. Cassandra in the series is Stella's almost stepmother, who is an evil, domineering force. She basically usurps all power in Solaria even before her marriage, through an alliance with Valtor. This arc is one of the most exciting, interesting ones out of the series. Stella trying to rescue her father and her kingdom from Cassandra and Chimera's clutches, and also having to deal with how she is treated whilst her father is under Valtor's spell, are all really important in Stella's character development. Having Cassandra as Queen of Solaria and stepmother to Stella instead of Luna in the show is already really exciting. You don't need to change anything about her relationship with Stella, but suddenly we are left with lots of interesting questions. How did she come to power? What is her history with Stella? Is King Radius still there? What is the nature of her investment in Stella's powers? It would also potentially explain why Solaria, the Kingdom of the Sun, is so overcast all the time. Imagine if, instead of the beginning of the series, Bloom had met Stella in the middle of the Cassandra takeover arc. Stella is restless, angry, isolated and scared. She has been humiliated and betrayed by the one person she relies on the most. Isn't it a little more understandable then if she is cruel and inconsistent? Also, tell me Kate Fleetwood is not Cassandra. Just look at this. And we already know she looks great as a blonde. Frankly, this just feels like a really obvious thing that I don't understand why they didn't do it. It really truly means that the team behind Fate have never watched Winx, and that is stunning. Straffi wanted Fate to exist as a consolation prize to the older fandom who've been griping about the direction of Winx for years. We know they know what we like and don't like, since a lot of Season 8 tried to justify itself through fan service. And yet, this is what we ended up with. Luna being Cassandra is such an easy, surface-level change that would be huge for the fandom and explain away a lot of what we don't like about the Otherworld and Stella. But I guess they didn't know she existed, so here we are. Another world of sorts, as we know, already exists in the Winx universe, as Tir na Nog. And this was filmed in Ireland, so I can't help but feel that there's another lost opportunity in there. Season 4 is a fan favourite. The revenge-crazed, sexy older women of Tir na Nog could have been easily appropriated into the show. You don't need to use their storyline, just slap their names on these characters like you did with everyone else, and you're all set. Obviously, we don't know where they are taking the character of Rosalind, and her powers, if I remember correctly, are unclear. They could be mind or earth-based. So I feel like Diana could have been an alternative to this character, and a way of introducing a person of colour to the cast, since the character is pretty explicitly South American. I don't know that this makes it more Winx, but you can certainly tie in Diana and the fairies of nature to this world they've got going. Even though transformation magic has been lost, perhaps there are still fairies who live in nature in their natural forms. They resent the technology that has been destroying their natural environment and are hostile to the governing forces. Perhaps we can reference Flora's home planet by introducing areas of Solaria where technology is completely banned in respect to these enclave communities of so-called natural fairies. This can be a way of introducing obstacles to future storylines where the main characters leave the boundaries of Althea. In high contrast to this, perhaps there are parts of the Otherworld, cities maybe, where technology and magic have woven together to create extreme environments, where fairies are impossible to separate from technology. Even in an elemental-based magic system, this makes sense. After all elements of technology have to originate from the natural world. Perhaps a certain someone comes from such a place. This could be a way of retroactively reintroducing the sci-fi elements of Winx that made it so unique. I think though, in general, exploring the tension between magic and technology is something that this show has to do. They touched on it in episode 1, when Bloom was disappointed to see people updating their Instas rather than fluttering around like Tinkerbell. But it was more to wave it off. If the people of the Otherworld have Instagram accounts but don't know where California is, you kind of have to address that. How much are they allowed to share on social media? How is it regulated? How does it not endanger their world? Having fairies have their own technology is an easy way to address this, and having fairies who resist technology is an easy way to introduce conflict and obstacles, and flesh out the Otherworld as a place that is lived in and existing outside of what we are allowed to see. I think it has always been really important to the story of the Winx Club that Bloom was raised by loving parents. It renders Daphne's sacrifice meaningful and significant. It was also a lovely representation of adoptive family dynamics, when this is often not the case on TV. As a child, I was really interested to see the scenes where two sets of Bloom's parents were together, and how Marion and Oratel were just kind of bad at it compared to Mike and Vanessa. Vanessa in Fate is a tyrannical, incompetent mother who bullies and straight up abuses her child. All the while, we are encouraged to bear in mind that she is a feminist. What are the implications here? Vanessa did not need to be evil for Bloom to have angst, yet this choice was made. Interesting. And so I would completely remove Vanessa being an abuser from the show. We have nice, competent mother Vanessa, and they can still argue. It's normal for teenagers to have arguments with their mothers. And Bloom can still burn her accidentally, and now her angst is even worse because her mother didn't do anything to deserve it. I think that Bloom's agency in deciding to study magic has always been really important to the show. She is choosing to be here, to be in this world, in this dimension, even though she kind of doesn't belong to it. An aspect of Winx is that, okay, Bloom is a lost princess, and there are prophecies that I guess she is bound to, but ultimately, it's not a chosen one story. The Winx girls are at the forefront of their stories by choice. So how I would readopt this into Fate would be through, again, this whole Vanessa-Bloom dynamic. Instead of feeling like a menace, feeling aggressive towards her mother, feeling out of control and having her hand forced, I would have Bloom very simply choose to come to the Otherworld. I did tentatively peek into the novelization, and no comment. But this dynamic is explored more in the book. Bloom is absolutely forced into the Otherworld by Fata. Instead, I would make it Bloom's choice. She discovered her powers, maybe she did set her house on fire, but ultimately she is here on a personal quest, rather than wanting to leave as quickly as possible. Let's get to Musa. Yes, this isn't our Musa, and this is not how the casting should have been. But I have seen a consensus that, irritatingly, this was one of the better characterizations in the show. Indeed, Musa's scenes with Sam and her slow-budding friendship with Terra are some of the chiller, more convincing moments of the story. So if we want to keep Aisha around, there are obvious ways we can take it. Darcy is one of the best-loved villains in the show, and possibly the most popular member of the Trix. Whilst Icy is often painted as the direct counterpart to Bloom, Darcy is the Trix who makes it personal when she enters that relationship with Riven back in Season 1. And oh look, she has mind powers. For some reason, it was decided that sound doesn't fit the elemental theme of this world, so Musa is a mind fairy in Fate. In the show, we see Musa being frustrated that her powers don't lend her a lot of active combat potential, but later we see that she has the ability to take Sam's pain away. This holds exciting insinuations that should she wish it, she could later develop her powers into something akin to Darcy's in the series, playing with and manipulating emotions and visions. Renaming Musa Darcy is such an obvious fix that I don't understand why they didn't jump on it when they were getting backlash for the initial casting announcements, like they did with the Flora Terra situation. Darcy in Fate could remain as she is in the story for now, getting close to Terra and starting a relationship with Sam, but it has exciting implications for the future. And now, we are free to reintroduce Musa into the story with an appropriately Asian actress. Alternatively, if introducing a villain to the mix instead of one of the main cast was too much, you could have easily made the character Musa into Roxy, a mind fairy with a special connection to animals. And Aisha, I think, could have fit the part really well. Winx fans have been begging for years for Roxy to be readopted as a main character, and this could have been the way. Roxy in the beginning is terse and even mean, a bit like Musa in Fate, and her relationship with Flora and as the anti-Bloom are all dynamics that fit Fate's plot. Once again, we see so many missed opportunities, on top of the more egregious insidious aspects. There is so much already in Winx to make an edgy aesthetic teen show, even if the kind that they were clearly aiming for. The more I think about it, the more I am reminded of Season 4 with the Changeling storyline, the fairy side, the aesthetics, and the setting. In general, had I been making this show, since we forewent the spacey setting, I would have used a lot of Season 4 in my world building. I might even have introduced the Wizards of the Black Circle into the mix, since their grungy, punky aesthetics fit this world. Making Fate the Winx Saga into basically a live action of Season 4, with Roxy as the main character instead of Bloom, being discovered and aided on her quest to rescue her ancestors by 6 fairies from another dimension, would have been the edgy fan-servicey live action we deserved. Its earthly setting would have served their evident budgetary constraints, and as for all the crazed mass murders, this is basically the story they came up with independently, which is kind of funny if you think about it. Now we're getting to the part where I'm starting to leave the boundaries of the story so far, but I more think of this as something that would be introduced in later seasons. Because I'm trying to stay within the plot, I wouldn't introduce 3 new characters in Season 1. Let's say in Season 2, I would introduce Tecna, Flora, and Musa. Since Mr. Young seems to take an issue with Winx's weird naming conventions, which admittedly can be a little on the nose for a live-action adaptation, you can always take the 99 approach. You know, if you had actually done research about the show you were adapting. Tecna can become Tina and Musa Lisa, if need be. Although neither of those names were more on the nose or all that weirder than Terra. Tina I would introduce as a specialist. Mr. Young was so excited to introduce men as fairies, even though, this was never not the case in the original show. Yet we didn't really get much of women as specialists. I still don't see why Tecna couldn't have been an electricity fairy, but okay, whatever. Tina is a specialist specializing in tech. I'm not the first to point out that a hacker, edgy gamer Tecna would have slipped smoothly into the edgy, gritty modern world of Fate. I would still keep her more loyal to her original character though. Antisocial not because she's just an edgy teenager, but more so because she lacks the social literacy. This is something she struggles with in the original series, where she has a tough time handling both her own and others' emotions and feelings, because she is focused too much on being right and doing only what is logical. That can be compelling as a character beat, though not particularly original. As for Musa, we could do a couple of things. She could either be introduced as a specialist who really likes music, or as an air fairy who manipulates, wait for it, air, to make sound waves in order to make music. A fairy who is so passionate that she hones her only tangentially related powers to create and use music as a combat tool. They could have done that, and it would have been so much cooler than headphones make me less psychic. Whenever she uses her power, you could play those flute notes that were her calling card in Season 1. I still think that the show has the chance to atone for their casting decisions and introduce an Asian character to the main cast, as they are doing with Flora. They could do this through, like I said, introducing a Roxy, or even a Lisa with music powers in the way I explained. And I hope they do. Since the show exists, it might as well get better. Flora, we know, will be introduced in Season 2, so I'm hesitant to offer anything, but I do kind of like the idea of her as a slightly menacing presence. I know Flora in the original show was sweet and kind and insecure, and also the one most prone to fainting. The feminine vulnerability was a big draw. However, back in my day, when dinosaurs roamed the earth and Winx was still good, one thing that was really popular on YouTube were bad MS Paint renditions of dark Enchantix. Probably inspired by that one time Bloom went dark, these were just videos of the Winx transforming with darker color schemes. But the implications always intrigued me. What would a dark Flora be like? How would she act? What would be her motivations? Since Terra in the show takes on a lot of vulnerable qualities, I would juxtapose them against Flora, someone with a similar personality and ability, but a lot more confidence and poise. This would give Terra's insecurities more of an origin than just, I'm fat and that's really unlikable according to Netflix. Having an older sister, or a cousin, whatever, to be always compared to is tough enough, and could be enhanced if we get Flora as a more standoffish, colder character. I would introduce Tina, Lisa, and Flora together as older students in the year above, part of the main cast, but also within their own trio at first. They could even have the Trix suite for consistency. Season 1 ends with the school being taken over by a new regime, and the trio could start off as the darlings of this new system, a threatening, controlling presence over the Winx girls who maybe spy and report back to Rosalind, I don't think that making them slightly villainous to begin with is inapt, since our Trix replacement Beatrix is implied to not necessarily be wrong in her convictions. So we are missing an evil trio. And Musa, who was always implied to have a dark side, Tecna, who can be quite mean and contrary, and this new Flora, who is cold and distant, but extremely competent, can make up for the lack. Maybe over time this can change, and they can become more sympathetic. My initial plan was just to focus on the girls, but since I'm here, I might as well touch on the boys. We know that we are likely getting some new boys for Season 2, but they do mostly seem to be original characters, which is annoying since the specialists are also quite important for the Winx fandom. Growing up, Winx wasn't just a show for girls. It was the rare piece of girls' media that boys also enjoyed. The specialists were always more than love interests. Their stories shaped the show too. Winx and the specialists were first and foremost good friends. So to completely forgo the men of the Winx Club is to once again misunderstand the show, the fandom, and the show's viewing demographic. If I were introducing new men into the show, both as characters and love interests, I would introduce the two best boys, Helia and Naboo. As a child, I wasn't allowed to watch much TV, so a lot of my Winx content came from the comics actually. The stories in the comics are less high-stakes adventures, although those do happen too, but more based on personal relationships. As a result, the characters and dynamics evolve differently from the animated series, and there are also new characters and locations. For me, those characterizations are often stronger in my mind, and the comics are a lot more nostalgic than the multi-films. I feel like this is an aspect of the Winx Club that people haven't really covered actually, which is a real shame. Helia features prominently in the comics, and Naboo gets a lot more content than we were able to glean in 2 seasons, so I like both a lot. So, Naboo is the name of the Sumerian god of wisdom, so that is how I have always seen Naboo. I feel like I'm not pulling this out of nowhere. I feel like there is some Sumeria in the picture for Andros. This isn't relevant, I just think the concept is cool. At any rate, I would definitely have introduced Naboo into the mix. There's a really smug interview of Brian Young somewhere where he is really pleased with himself for introducing male fairies, a concept that was never not part of the Winxverse. So again, it is bizarre that they forewent all the obvious male characters who wield magic. I think it's a good idea to keep Naboo and Aisha as coming from the same realm, because this would help flesh out the idea of the Otherworld being more than Solaria, as a place that is lived in and real, and be good reinforcement of the idea that all of the Winx girls have backgrounds and lives that are distinct and separate, and that they don't just exist for bloom. As a child, I thought that Helia also came across as Asian coded, just because Rainbow had a very specific way of drawing Asian characters, and he seemed to fit that. So I would introduce Helia as a long-haired East Asian guy and love interest to Terra. In reference to both the series and the comics, he could be a pacifist who dropped out of Althea and who is forced to come back due to rising tensions. In the series, he's the nephew of Saladin, and I would do something similar where maybe he is related to Sol. That could bring a competitive or envious dynamic between him and Sky, since Sol is Sky's father figure. And I imagine, despite his calmer temperament, he wouldn't be afraid to put Riven in his place. Introducing a love interest to Terra is important, because so far this show has treated her rather horribly. Terra was seemingly introduced to bring some much-needed diversity to the show, and yet she spends the whole time being pummeled by the narrative for it. She is punished for her vulnerability, and despite having moments of great confidence and self-awareness, she is needy and insecure, which are associated with her appearance. Through a relationship, we would be allowed to see Terra as appealing both regardless and perhaps because of her appearance. Her arguably feminine vulnerability, which in the first season is often portrayed as a negative trait, may be allowed to become a positive one. This would be an alternative to what Musa offer, who have a more bantery dynamic, and for whom vulnerability comes at a great cost. Winx was never perfect. And with a hard reboot on the horizon, there's a lot to be said about what should be done differently and what should be kept as it is. But it was a really creative, colourful, funny series that marked the childhood of many. The story of Fate, the Winx Saga, even with all these alterations, regretfully is not as compelling a story as the magical space opera that was Winx's original arc. But I hope I've demonstrated that it wouldn't have taken that many surface-level alterations to explain away a lot of the weaker aspects of the show for a much more satisfying Winx-themed viewing experience. A lot of what I've offered as alternative isn't actually good, it just holds the promise of goodness. And sometimes that's enough to get an audience really excited. I know that some people have ended up really liking the show just the way it is. I myself actually don't hate this show as much as I thought it would. It and the cast themselves have really grown on me. I think their relationships with each other are really cute, and since they all seem to be in the beginning of their careers, I hope it goes well for their sake. And at any rate, I think that the Winx fandom are pretty good at compartmentalizing by now. Nor are AUs new to the Winx franchise. On the whole, those are factors that could bode well for Fate's future as a Winx-related product. That being said, I don't think that the type of criticism I was making is invalid. The entire justification for the existence of this show is fan service. But this show respects its audience so little, respects its source material so little. It had all the potential of being a fun, fan-servicey show that was good enough. We really didn't need a trade-off between a completely new and different story and true to the original characters and fun Easter eggs. Season 2 is on the way, and it is clear that they have been paying attention. And whilst I don't expect them to suddenly really appreciate what Winx was, I hope it gets better, and I hope it finds a way to make up for its mistakes. Since it exists, it might as well improve. And finally, thank you for watching. This is my first ever attempt at a video, and I wanted an easier topic to tackle. So whilst it is over a year late, and the takes are very stale, and the sound was very inconsistent, I hope that you managed to enjoy it. I do look forward to any feedback you might have on content or on quality, because I would like to improve. I have in mind a video covering Winx's worst controversies next. I have a lot of Winx-related video ideas in general, on parts of the franchise less covered, like the comics, forums, musicals, dodgy interviews with the studio, etc. But I do also want to branch out eventually and talk more generally about media, books, and maybe more. So if you are interested, I hope you will stick around, and I might see you soon. Bye!